So let's go more into detail on databases, specifically from an Android point of view. Let's talk about the SQL language first though. So in order to put data into a database or to get data out of a database, you need to put together some commands and to send that command to the database. The database then sends back relevant information. Now maybe that information that it'll send back is the data that you requested. And for example, if you asked for a list of all the customers in a given table, the database might send that back to you, or it might return the status of an operation. For example, if you wanted to delete a particular customer, it would return a message or some sort of status letting you know that it was successful or it wasn't successful in deleting that customer. So let's go through a few SQL definitions just to get you up to speed with those, because they're very useful when discussing databases and SQL in general. Let's start with what a statement is. Now, a statement is any text that conforms to valid SQL code, structured query language. You use statements to send commands to the database. Query. Very similar to a statement, but it also receives back a record set, that is a set of records or set of rows, if you will, that can optionally be empty. So which one do you use, statement or query? Well, the examples are query, would return a list of customers from a database. A statement, delete a customer with name Tim. You can see how they're both completely different types of operations. So note that a statement can still receive a status code, whether it succeeded or failed, but it can't receive some records. And a query, of course, does actually return that list in this case, a list of customers. But it would return whatever data you requested. The great thing about all of this is Android has provided access to SQLite via a library. Now, just to refresh your memory, a library is something like you can see on the screen, android.os.async task. We've used that a number of times in this course. That's a library that Android have given us to use that functionality. So we've used libraries before. Google have given us libraries to access SQLite very easily. So Android database is there's two main libraries, android.database. Now that's very general database stuff. And the android.database.SQLite is specific functionality that is specific to SQLite itself. We've got a SQLite database. That's android.database.SQLite.SQLite database. So this allows you to open, query, and otherwise manipulate SQLite databases and their data. So queries and statements can be used here. SQLite cursor. Android.database.SQLite.SQLite cursor. This represents a query and allows you to loop through the records returned from the SQLite database. So you can think of a cursor generally as a set of records, but what it isn't, it's not actually all those records. It's more a pointer to those records. And the reason that that's done that way is you can imagine if you had 100,000 records, let's say, you wouldn't want to call a function and have all those records take up all the valuable RAM on the device. So instead what happens is you can query and you can sort of walk through one record at a time, one row or one record at a time, and get the data just for that one row. So you can sort of use a loop to go through to go right through the database if you want to and retrieve all the records. So the cursor helps you with that functionality. SQLite Query Builder. Android.database.SQLite.SQLite Query Builder. Now this allows you to build a SQL statement piece by piece before sending it to the SQLite database for execution. Now you've seen an example in a previous app on builders where we built up a search query. Well, this is a similar thing, but it's designed or it's used for SQLite. And SQLite statement. Android.database.SQLite.SQLite statement. Now this creates a statement once and uses placeholders within it for the data, so you can sort of pass parameters of the type of information you're looking for. For example, a customer name or an amount or whatever it is, of using SQLite because you're not creating new data time and time again. It's created once and then you're just updating that information, the placeholders, as you change the query. And lastly, SQLite Open Helper android.database.sqlite.sqlite open helper. This helps and really assists with creation of a database. Because if you think about it, if you've got an app and you publish an app in the App Store, the very first time your app runs, if you want it to use a database, you need to create that database. So you need to have some code in your application that looks to see, is there already a database? If not, I need to create the database. And of course, it's not just creating the database, it's also the tables and the fields within those tables as well. And even perhaps you might be putting some default data in there. For example, if you're using your database for some settings, then you might want to, that first time when you're creating the database, store what are the default settings for your app. So there needs to be a mechanism in place to do that, and we're going to be doing that in our app, and SQLite Open Helper helps us to achieve that. Now you are going to see all this in action, so don't panic too much. I know I've used a lot of terminology and so forth, but it's really just aimed to give you a bit of an overview. And we are going to use some other things that I haven't put on these slides, such as adapters, very similar to what we saw when we used the Flickr browser in the past as well. Was this useful to you? I hope you got some really solid information from these videos to get a better understanding of the basics of databases, SQL, and even SQLite and the Android implementation. Now, I don't expect you at this point to have to be an expert at it. It was really meant to be just an overview, just to get the ball rolling and to get things started in your mind. So coming up in the next set of videos, we're going to begin development of our app. So you'll see the theory that we talked about in this set of 3 videos come into play when we actually use those concepts in a real app. So by seeing the app in action as we develop and put it together, this should really help solidify your understanding of databases. So I'll see you in those next set of videos.